News!
Okay, we'll start with this. Fortuna's promoter will not allow Haney versus Campbell clash to come off. Eddie Hearn, who promotes both Haney and Campbell, revealed to Boxing Scene's Ron Lewis that he planned to match his two boxers on a date in August or September. It's a bit of a mess, really, Hearn said to BoxingScene.com. Luke has been ordered to fight Javier Fortuna for the world title. Now, the interim world title. Because of the delay, Devin Haney is back and ready to go. I'd rather they fight each other. Luke seems up for it, Devin Haney seems up for it, and that is a fight I will try and make in August or September. Luke is as fit as a fiddle. He wants to go back in a big fight. Devin Haney will be one of the first guys back on the U.S. side. Lewkowicz, who read Heard's statements, intends to do everything possible to ensure his fighter is not sidestepped in the situation. There will be no fight between Devin Haney and Luke Campbell. Javier Fortuna is the #1 contender under the WBC. There is an order from the WBC for Fortuna and Campbell to fight for the interim title. They cannot just skip the #1 contender. Haney can make a voluntary defense against anyone in the rankings, but not against Campbell, because he already agreed to fight Fortuna.
The nerve of this fucking guy.
Let me tell you something. Back in April, Devin Haney himself was the one who was trying to petition the WBC to have that fight with Javier Fortuna. And it was Samson Lewkowicz who didn't want to go ahead with that fight. It was Samson Lewkowicz who was insistent that Javier fight Luke Campbell instead. Here you have an opportunity to be fast-tracked to a world title shot, and you want to delay that process. Essentially, you don't want your guy fighting Devin Haney in his very next fight. All right, well, if you don't want that Devin Haney fight, Luke Campbell does. So why are you trying to stop him from getting the shot? They're not trying to skip you.
You're dragging this out.
I talked about this weeks ago, how Samson Lewkowicz was being all fucking weird about the pecking order. For those interested in that video, I'll leave the link to it in the description box. Samson wanted things to proceed as planned, proceed as agreed. He wanted his guy, Javier, to fight Luke. But guess what? Luke's got the opportunity to skip your guy and fight for a world title.
Since you don't want to.
It could have been you when Devin Haney was petitioning the WBC to have your guy fight him instead, but that's not what you guys wanted.
Right then.
Why the fuck are you being all weird about it? I'll tell you what I think. I think Samson Lewkowicz is gonna fuck his guy right out of an opportunity. That's what I think. And the reason for that is neither Luke Campbell or Javier Fortuna are Devin Haney's mandatory challengers. Neither one of them. Thus, neither one of them has the right, can reserve the right, to fight for the title.
Pay attention.
So Devin can always fight Luke as a voluntary. If he feels like giving that guy an opportunity, if he feels like giving that guy a title shot, Samson Lewkowicz and Javier Fortuna don't have the power to stop him. You're not his mandatory challenger. Not yet. So what happens if the fight comes off? What happens if Devin Haney's very next fight is against Luke Campbell? How does that affect the rank standings? How does that affect the pecking order? Well, this is where it gets dicey. In the absence of an interim champion, the WBC is likely to order a final eliminator to crown one. It means they're going to match Javier against somebody. They're going to order him to fight somebody. The next guy in the rank standings behind Javier and Luke is Ryan Garcia. Excuse me for saying so, but I'm not completely convinced that the people over there at Golden Boy are going to allow Ryan at this stage in his career to fight someone as seasoned as Javier. Maybe they will. I mean, they were going to let him fight Jorge Linares, right?
Right.
But Jorge Linares has the profile that Javier doesn't have. At minimum, you can say that Jorge gained some notoriety as a champion at that time for having knocked down Vasil Lomachenko. So if Ryan were to go in there with Jorge and he has a good showing, he gets a bit of a profile boost. Whereas if he goes in there with Javier, who's even lesser known than Jorge is, what does he actually get? Oh, hardcores like me and you might know who Javier is and what he's capable of, but in the greater scheme of things, the casual audience, they don't know nothing about that guy. I wouldn't mind seeing Ryan lock horns with Javier Fortuna. I just don't know if that's a realistic proposition. What's more realistic is Javier Fortuna versus either Ivan Mendy or Zaur Abdullaev. And I know that Jorge Linares is ranked ahead of both of those guys, but I'd sooner believe that Jorge would hold out for that Ryan Garcia fight instead of taking a chance on Javier Fortuna, who I reiterate, doesn't have much of a profile. Perhaps what Samson Lewkowicz can do is petition for Javier Fortuna and either Ivan Mendy or Zaur Abdullaev, maybe even Richard Comey, to be for the WBC's interim title, thereby making the winner the mandatory challenger to Devin Haney's green belt. And I understand that this is hardly ideal, that in an ideal world, it'd be Javier versus Ryan, something along those lines. But when have things ever been ideal with the WBC? And better still, when have things ever been ideal in the sport of boxing? Things are seldom ever ideal in the sport of boxing.
Exactly.
Thus, it's not a question of what's ideal, it's a question of what is likelier than not. What's a more realistic proposition? And Fortuna versus Mendy or Fortuna versus Abdulayev seems a lot more realistic to me than Fortuna versus Garcia. This is in the event that the Devin Haney versus Luke Campbell fight comes off, and you'll excuse me for saying so, but I just don't see a lot that Samson Lewkowicz and Javier Fortuna can do in that situation. Devin Haney can always fight Luke as a voluntary, and in that situation, Lewkowicz is powerless to stop him. In other lightweight news, Ryan Garcia, who we just talked about, says they're going to say Linares was old, has no chin when I catch him. He was quoted as saying, I'm in a very tricky situation, you know. Obviously, I can't get that Linares fight next because of the travel restrictions and whatnot, so I'm looking elsewhere. But, you know, I'm definitely not going to get any type of, I guess, what you would say credit for any victory I'm going to get if it's not Linares. And if it was Linares, let's be honest, people already got those excuses lined up, you know what I mean? They're going to say Linares was old, and they're going to say he has no chin when I catch him, so I'm already ready for it. But what I do know is no matter who I fight, I'm going to keep moving forward. As long as I'm in the ring, you know what I mean? As long as I'm in the ring fighting, it's going to be good for me. So that's what I'm aiming for. The 21-year-old Garcia still expects to fight this summer. There's something in the works, Garcia said. We're working at it every day to make a fight happen. The last opponent I had was Abner Mares. It looks like it might not happen because I think he's just going to try to cash out one last time. So I think he might price himself out. But other than that, we're going to keep looking. Well, let's be honest, folks. Ryan does have a point here. I mean, even Vasil Lomachenko's victory over Jorge Linares, who was then the WBA and Ring Magazine lightweight champion at that time. Even when Vasil Lomachenko beat this guy, there were those out there who didn't make much of it. It was an underappreciated victory over what was a reigning 3-division champion. They didn't give Loma a whole lot of credit for that fight, some folks.
They didn't.
And those kind of people, they likely won't give Ryan Garcia any more credit than they gave Vasil Lomachenko. Loma couldn't get credit for beating Jorge and taking his belts.
At least with some people.
There's a pretty good chance that Ryan won't get much credit for him either. So Ryan's definitely onto something, but Ryan's got the idea.
The right one.
That's the kind of fight that he needs, regardless of what the naysayers are neighing about. That's the kind of experienced fight against the kind of experienced fighter that Ryan hasn't had the opportunity to face yet. That's a litmus test for Ryan, and he needs it. You know, Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney. These young guys, they're all part of the same generation, and they're all making their bones. But respectively, it is Ryan Garcia that has more catching up to do. I mean, where Teofimo Lopez has already knocked off a reigning world champion in Richard Comey, and he's about to fight another in Vasil Lomachenko. Ryan Garcia can't say the same, and Ryan Garcia's got 5 more pro fights than Teofimo does. Teofimo's only 15-0, whereas Ryan is 20-0. Think about Devin Haney and what they got in the works for that guy. That guy's supposed to be fighting Luke Campbell. We just talked about that. And Luke Campbell, as an opponent, is a more experienced guy than anyone you can find on Ryan Garcia's resume. So for Devin Haney, that's actually a good look. Essentially, what I'm getting at is Ryan needs that Linares fight, regardless of what the naysayers are neighing about, regardless of what they're saying. He has to have that kind of fight with that kind of fighter so that he can, in turn, grow as a fighter. It's a necessary evil, regardless of what people want to say afterwards, as there is never any shortage of those kinds of people. Fighting fighters like Jorge Linares, seasoned veterans, former champions, is all a part of the growing process. It is a necessary evil. I myself view the fight as a very intriguing fight, as Ryan Garcia has a lot to prove, and against a veteran like Jorge Linares, he has the opportunity to prove it. So I look forward to the fight happening when the fight happens, if the fight happens.
Yeah?
Let's just hope that it does at some point. And finally, WBC Super Featherweight Champion Miguel Berchelt's trainer says this. He says, Lomachenko is the one we want to beat. Alfredo Caballero, the trainer of Miguel Berchelt, likes the fight with Valdez because it presents him with the scenario of matching his skills as a trainer against Eddie Reynoso. I know it'll be a great fight. I admire Oscar a lot. We've known each other for many years. He trained with me on the Sonora team when he was an amateur before going to the Mexican Olympic Committee. It will be a great fight, but I consider Berchelt to be a more solid fighter. He is at his weight. He hits harder. They are very confident because Berchelt looks very stiff. But when they feel his punch and combinations, all the boxers say, "What did I get myself into?" Caballero told ESPN Deportes. It is going to be a great fight, and there are many who talk about the corners. I want to win, and what's more than beating Oscar Valdez and Eddie Reynoso? Now, as far as Miguel Berchelt versus Vasyl Lomachenko, Caballero says, in fact, we always talk about that fight. We have great fighters in our sights. We've been looking at Vasyl Lomachenko since he was at featherweight, super featherweight, and now at lightweight. I think if Berchelt were given a chance to move up to Lomachenko's division, we would face him. It would be a great challenge. Berchelt has him in his sights, and he is the boxer that we want to beat. Miguel Berchelt's supposed to be fighting Oscar Valdez. Oscar Valdez, who really hasn't accomplished a heck of a lot at 130 pounds, he just got there.
Yeah.
That being said, if Miguel Berchelt makes it past Oscar the way I'm expecting him to make it past Oscar, I really don't see Miguel Berchelt sticking around 130 pounds. I don't. He already walked away from an opportunity to unify titles with Jamel Herring. Jamel Herring, the WBO super featherweight champion. Miguel just didn't seem all that interested when it came to that. You think about the WBA champion, Leo Santa Cruz. What are the odds Miguel Berchelt lands a fight with him?
Huh?
He's on the PBC side of things. Gary fucking Russell couldn't land a fight with Leo, so Miguel Berchelt's gonna land a fight with Leo? Come on. You got the IBF champion, Jojo Diaz, who was supposed to be having a rematch with Tevin Farmer in his very next fight, but that has since changed. He's now under strict orders from the IBF to satisfy his mandatory challenger, Rakimov. So he's out of the running too.
Assuming he ever was in the running.
I don't think he was. Essentially what I'm getting at is, if Miguel Berchelt makes his way past Oscar Valdez, and I'm expecting him to, what I'm expecting to happen thereafter is for Miguel Berchelt to leave the super featherweight division and integrate himself into the lightweight division with the intention of challenging Vasyl Lomachenko. As Miguel doesn't seem very interested in anything that's going on in the super featherweight division. I do think the overall move is contingent upon Vasyl Lomachenko making it past Teofimo Lopez. In all likelihood, based on what's being reported, we're going to see Loma versus Lopez before we see Berchelt versus Valdez. Or at minimum, those fights might happen within proximity of each other. I think Miguel Berchelt will make the move to 135 if he beats Valdez and if Loma beats Teofimo. And that fight is a very interesting fight, a very interesting proposition, as both Vasyl Lomachenko and Miguel Berchelt were reigning champions in the super featherweight division at the same time. It's just that Vasyl Lomachenko eventually moved up to lightweight, and now Miguel seems to be in hot pursuit of him. The hunter has effectively become the hunted, as there are any variety of guys who want a piece of Vasyl Lomachenko. We know Teofimo Lopez does, Devin Haney does, and now Miguel Berchelt does.
Yeah, heavy is the head that wears the crown.
So much of the Vasyl Lomachenko conversation is dominated by what people think will happen when he fights Teofimo Lopez, that a fight like this, a proposition like this, doesn't really get much attention, but Miguel Berchelt brings some qualities, some characteristics of his own to the table, to the fight, that might actually trouble Vasyl Lomachenko. That's right. There is Miguel Berchelt's punching power and overall punch resistance to consider, his size to consider. Miguel's nowhere near as polished a boxer as Vasyl Lomachenko is. That's not his game. That's not what he does. Miguel's not a finesse fighting kind of fighter. But what he is a physically imposing fighter, a pressure fighter, kind of fighter that's more likely to fight fire with fire. Kind of guy who might look to walk through Vasyl Lomachenko's shots in order to deliver devastating shots of his own. Thus, the daunting task of trying to figure out what Vasyl Lomachenko's going to do next is no task at all against a guy like Miguel Berchelt, because Miguel is going to fight his fight regardless of what Vasyl Lomachenko is doing. And it then becomes a question of, can Vasyl Lomachenko work around this guy? Work around this pressure guy? Tell you the truth, that Loma versus Berchelt is just as intriguing as Loma versus Lopez, but not for the same reasons. Lopez, what's he got? 15 pro fights? A sensational knockout over Richard Comey, but better still, as far as champions go, he is on the greener end of the spectrum, whereas Miguel Berchelt, he's been a champion for a while now.
At super featherweight.
He's been in more of those world title fights, those championship situations in defense of his world title, whereas Teofimo, he's yet to have ever defended his, because he's going from winning the belt right into unifying it. It's safe to say that Miguel Berchelt has a lot more world-level experience than Teofimo does. I'd have to say that comparatively, Miguel Berchelt's particular methodology could make him a more troublesome opponent for Vasyl Lomachenko than Teofimo does. I mean, I am going out on a limb here. I am speculating. But a good amount of the reason...
Good amount of the time.
Vasyl Lomachenko is able to win these fights in the fashion that he wins these fights is because he's able to confuse and fluster his opponents, effectively disarming them, thereby demoralizing them. However, with Miguel Berchelt, it is a different kettle of fish. Miguel Berchelt is not the kind of fighter that's looking for the picture-perfect shot to end the fight. He's not looking to land a knockout off a big counter. This guy's relentless. He's going to come after you, and he's going to keep coming after you until he gets you. He's willing to fight fire with fire. He's willing to walk through shots to land shots. He is a more physical fighter than he is a cerebral fighter. And that kind of fighter, you'll excuse me for saying so, is the kind of fighter that could give Vasyl Lomachenko some problems. Bear in mind, Miguel Berchelt, this guy's far from being on the slide. This guy's not even 30 yet. This guy is in peak physical condition, and he has the kind of physical dimensions to adequately grow into 135 pounds. He's gonna feel right at home not having to cut the extra 5. If anything, he might arrive at lightweight feeling stronger and more invigorated than he was making 130. So at minimum, what I'll say is that while these are preliminary thoughts, the proposition of Berchelt versus Lomachenko sometime in the near future at 135 pounds is a very intriguing proposition. Just as, if not more intriguing, than the Lopez fight. Different reasons, of course, but just as titillating a matchup.